Hello, welcome. How is everyone on this beautiful Friday afternoon evening into the Sabbath? We're good? Amen. Good. Very good. Well, I have a question for you. Who traveled the farthest to get here? How many miles? Sacramento. So that's what? Over 100? Is it 150? 200? Okay, well, I think you got us all beat. Anyone travel longer than Sacramento? Shingletown. I still think Sacramento beats Shingletown. Okay, so definitely Sacramento's the farthest. Who traveled the shortest to get here? How many miles? Half a mile. Okay, great. Well, I think anyone less than a half a mile? Oh, I think, okay. Chad, are you less than a half a mile? Quarter mile, right? Oh, a couple blocks. Okay, I think he's got us all beat. Very good. Well, I just wanted to say welcome, whether you're a couple blocks away or all the way from Sacramento or you're viewing online, wherever you are, just want to say welcome. We're glad you're here. Thank you for the Ings, May and Dr. Ing for being here and for sharing with us. And before we begin, if it's okay, Audrey will say a prayer for us. So we'll bow our heads as Audrey prays.
Dear Jesus, thank you that we could be here, and thank you that it's a wonderful day, and thank you that Dr. Ing can speak. In Jesus' name, amen.
Oh. Did I give you the black case with because my remote is in there. I'm looking. Or did that stay in the office? Just a minute, I need the remote control. Makes it easier. So that's my cell phone number and my email if you need to get hold of me at some time in the future. Nothing's advancing. Okay. There we go. Foodborne disease. Food can improve your health or harm or hinder your health. It depends on your food choices. You can say broad general outlines. If it has a mother or a face, it's probably not going to contribute to your health. If it doesn't have a mother or your face, and it's a healthy plant-based food, it's probably going to be better for you. I have to say healthy because there's some plants, I mean, not all plants are safe to eat. Some plants are poisonous, and I don't want you to do that. But before I go any further, I know we've had prayer, but I like to pray. Dear Lord, thank you for a beautiful, beautiful day, for the sunshine, for the clear blue sky and fresh air. And as we learn and listen this evening, we ask for the presence and the power of your Holy Spirit, that your special children who are here will learn things and be willing to change if they need to change, or to continue doing what they're doing, to have better health and a closer walk in relationship with you. So may the Holy Spirit guide and direct in what is said, and may they hear what you want them to hear, is my prayer in Jesus' name. May your will be done. Amen. So the other title is Problems with Meat, or we could say Problems with Animal Foods, either way. The master lovers of destiny. Feet, you exercise, okay. Forks, what do you put in your mouth? Fingers, what do you put in your mouth, and do you smoke? So again, feet, forks, and fingers. If I'm in Asia, instead of forks, I say chopsticks, okay? So you should know this. New Start, those are the principles we teach and we follow and we encourage. Food, nutrition. E, exercise. W, water. S is sunlight. I got sunlight today. T is temperance. Temperance, nothing which is bad for you, like tobacco, alcohol, and beverages containing caffeine, and using in moderation that which is good, because even too much of something good is not good for you, so that's temperance. A is air, R is rest, T is trust in God. The better you know Him, the more you will trust Him. So you are what you eat, okay? And if you eat the standard American diet, there's a high probability you'll end up maybe not quite as large as the profile of the gentleman there, but the statistics are, in the United States, 2/3 of adult Americans are overweight. And out of that 2/3, 1/2 are obese. And they do that by using something we call the body mass index. And if you want to know the formula for that, I can tell you, but it's very simple. 703 times your weight in pounds divided by your height in inches 2 times. For example, if I weigh 150 pounds, I multiply 150 times 703, and if I'm 5 feet 10, okay, that's 70 inches, so I divide the result of 103 times 150 divided by 70 twice. And that gives you a number. If it's over 25 or higher, you're overweight. If it's 30 or higher, you're considered obese. And the other thing that I mentioned is it's really, you can call it the eyeball test, okay? And if you're at home, if you have a full-length mirror in your bedroom, bath, whatever, just close the door, take off all your clothes, and stand in front of the mirror. And if you look like you're overweight, you probably are, okay? This gentleman here in the picture, he has Dunlop's disease. He's Dunlapped over the belt, and you see advertisements on this, on the media, how to lose weight, take this, do this thing, or, whatever, some magic potion or something, and if you do this, you're going to lose 20 pounds in the next few weeks. Get your attention, but they're not true. Hippocrates said, "Let thy food be thy medicine." He noticed that food is related to the illnesses that people have. He said that about 450 years before the birth of Christ. So changing your diet will make a difference from eating the food that's up in the left-hand corner to what's down in the center below. Plant-based. Plant foods eaten whole. Say we say PFEW, plant foods eaten whole. Then we modify it a little bit. We say healthy, low fat, and I say low refined sugar, because if the sugar that's naturally available in fruits, I'm not concerned about that. But refined sugar, I'm more concerned. Low refined sugar, eaten whole, at regular times, with nothing between meals, enough to get to and stay at your ideal weight. That's the essence of nutrition. I can say that in 20 seconds. Okay. And the other thing is, in selecting foods, there's another acronym which I like, is G-BOMBS. Menu plan. G, the first G, greens. B, beans, legumes, peas, lentils, garbanzos, those are all beans. Kidney beans, pinto beans, any type of bean. O, onions and garlic. M, mushroom. The second B, berries. Blueberries, strawberries, raspberries, boysenberries, And the last, the S is seeds, cereal grains, nuts and seeds. Okay? G-BOMBS. Pick your food from those groups and you should do very well. Okay, problems with meat. Scientific evidence, and they've been looking at this, show that the more meat, fish, chicken, eggs, and dairy people eat, the more diseases they have. That's what contributes to heart disease, high blood pressure, diabetes, cancer, and strokes, especially when you combine it with not enough exercise or inactivity. And we're going to talk about that later on. So you need to think about that. So knowing what to do is not enough unless you put it into practice. If you know it, and you know you should do it, you know you should change, you've got to change. If you don't change, knowing is not doing you a bit of good. See? So, let's see. James says, if you know what to do, and you're not supposed to do it, what does he call it? Sin. So, in other words, if knowing what to do and not doing it, especially if it relates to God's law and His 10 Commandments, it's sin. So if you know what to do to improve your health, and you're not doing it, you can say, well, I'm shortening my life, and one of the commandments says, thou shalt not kill. So am I, shortening my life, so would I be breaking that commandment? I'm not going to give you the answer. I'll let that be between you and God, but think about it. Because if you know what you need to do to improve your life and your health, like exercise or whatever, and you don't do it because it's too inconvenient or the food tastes too good or I can't do it, it's between you and God. Talk to Him about it. When a person says, I can't do it, that means I won't do it. Okay, there's a big difference between physically being able to and not, okay? I mean, if you've had a stroke and you're paralyzed, yeah, you can't walk or move that part of the body. Okay. The other thing is start to look at food labels. Look at the package of food, whatever you buy. Spaghetti, pasta, Jell-O, Impossible burgers, Corn Flakes, spaghetti sauce, French fries, read the label. And don't look at what's on front. You've got to look around on the back. Okay? And let's see. The first ingredient is always the biggest. Avoid partially hydrogenated oil and high fructose corn syrup. I mean, well, it's made from corn. Well, yeah, but it's not a healthy form of carbohydrate. It is a carbohydrate. We talked about carbohydrates last night. I said you need more carbs, but you don't want it in high fructose corn syrup, and you don't want it in refined sugar. You can eat all the corn you want. Sweet corn, that's great. And sugar beets are fine, but you don't want to get the sugar that's refined out of the beet. Sugar cane is fine too if you're willing to chew on it, but you don't want the refined cane sugar. Okay? So avoid partially hydrogenated oil. That's what they use to make your margarines and things like that. They have to take the oil, partially hydrogenate, they add hydrogen back. That's so they can get it in a more solid form rather than a liquid form. And the longer the ingredient list, the more cautious you should be. So remember that. And fiber is your friend. And when you eat grains, you want whole grains, whole wheat bread, whole grain cereals. And you want that to be there because fiber is important. Okay? So a plant-based diet, 95% reduction in heart disease, diabetes, 85% reduction in cancer. Dr. Dean Ornish published a paper in Lancet Medical Journal back in the early 90s showing that with changes in diet, exercise, stress management, and so on, he was able to take people who showed coronary angiograms in which their arteries were narrowed after they went on the program that he was teaching them. The narrowing, the opening got better. In other words, there was reversal of the narrowing of the coronary arteries in his study. Okay, so he's proved it, and other people have proved it as well. Dr. Dean Ornish also worked with some men who had prostate cancer, and they didn't want to do the traditional treatment. The traditional treatment is usually radiation and or surgery. But he had patients who didn't want to do that, and he put them on a healthy, low-fat, low-refined sugar, plant-based diet. And these patients did better. They survived and did better than they were than regular doctors thought they would do. So that's important. So your healthy lifestyle can lower your risk for cancer, and exercise also lowers your risk for the cancers, colon, breast, prostate, and uterine cancer, okay? Animal food. I was not raised as a vegetarian. Even though both of my parents were physicians, they both had graduated from College of Medical Evangelists. My dad went to medical school. He finished in 1931. My mother finished in 1950. It was still called College of Medical Evangelists. And when I was raised as a child, I got lots of meat, fish, and chicken with almost every meal. So that's the way I was raised. So I didn't know any better. But when we had our first children, we decided to do things differently. So animal food, mad cow disease, that was like in the early 90s, the late 80s. Bird flu, swine flu, they have chicken flu. Fish contains mercury, DDT, and other chemicals. So fish is not really a safe source of food. Have you ever heard of broccoli flu, cauliflower flu, spinach flu, cabbage flu, or kale flu? No, because there is no such thing. Now, it is true that with certain types of plant foods, you've got to be careful, and especially if you buy salad greens where they're already mixed, unless they're careful in their processing, there can be contamination and problems. But by and large, your your plant-based foods are going to be quite safe. But there is a possibility from time to time, especially if the processing is near some dairy or some big feedlot, sometimes there's contamination from the animals. And if they don't have good pest control where they package and do that, there is contamination. But by and large, your plant foods are much better. Raising cattle is a huge business. 1 billion cows alive today. So 25% of the land mass in the world is used for pasture. 2.5 to 50 acres are needed to feed a cow for a year. 29% of the U.S. land mass is used to either raise food for the cattle or the cattle are grazing on it. The U.S. has 100 million cows producing 26 million pounds of meat for a year. Okay? $36 billion industry. 24% of the cash receipts from U.S. farms are related to meat production. U.S. consumes almost 1/4 of the world's beef, and it's the 4th largest manufacturing industry in the U.S. 7% of supermarkets sales are related to meat. So you can't hear this, unfortunately, but if your cow sounds like this, you would hear a cow mooing. If your cow sounds like this, okay, you can fire up the barbecue. But if your cow looks like this, and it sounds like this, and with the soundtrack, you should hear a cow laughing. You know, we're talking about is mad cow disease. Okay? If your cow sounds like this, you better order a veggie burger. Now, the seafood diet. What is he saying? You can eat anything you like. Here's a list of everything you like. So the doctor says you can eat anything you like, and here's what you need to like. So, okay. Now, when mad cow disease was rampant in the late 80s and the early 90s, and sometimes when they have swine flu or other diseases affecting cows, foot and mouth disease, what they do is they would just kill the animals, and if they found an animal with the disease, they would slaughter the whole herd. And then they would just dump diesel or gas on them and they'd burn them up. What does that do for your environment? Not too good. So do cows make people mad? I remember when that first came out. And this was a cover on Newsweek magazine, the slow, deadly spread of mad cow disease, how it could become an epidemic. And when it first came out, people were really concerned about that, and justly so, because who wants mad cow disease? The human form of mad cow disease, we'll talk about that in just a few minutes. But mad cow disease, that's the general term. The scientific term is bovine, referring to cows, spongiform, referring to the appearance of the brain. There's holes in the brain, which shouldn't be there, encephalopathy. Okay? And it was first recognized 1984. That was like 39 years ago, with the appearance in cattle in England. And by May of 2011, there had been almost 185,000 cases recognized in cattle throughout the world. And how did it get started and how did it spread? Well, it spread from something called animal byproduct, or animal byproduct is what's produced in the processing of meat. There's stuff that cannot be used. The bones, the blood, the guts. I mean, some people eat some of the intestines, and all of this. And this is processed into something called animal byproduct. An animal byproduct, is a cheap form of protein. So the people who raise cows, pigs, chickens, and other things that needed to have food, they would often add this animal byproduct to the feed that was given to these animals. So, in essence, cows were eating parts of dead cows that had been processed. And if the cow that they were eating from had mad cow disease, we'll find out how that gets through the processing, and it caused problems. So, mad cow disease is one of a group of diseases called transmissible spongiform encephalopathies, and those have been known since 1732, which is what, 251 years ago, because and in sheep it's called scrapie. So that's a transmissible spongiform encephalopathy. BSE is one of that class of diseases. Now, in humans, there's a disease called Kuru that's found only on the island of New Guinea, Papua New Guinea, and Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease, which is found throughout the world. That's a neurologic disease. And Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease, we shorten and say CJD. Okay? Now, transmissible spongiform encephalopathies have been found in mink, mule deer, elk, sheep, and even in household cats in England. So how did the cats get it? Most likely from eating some cat food that probably came from an animal with mad cow disease. Okay? Mink, well, mink, it could have come from some animals. There's a disease in deer and elk called chronic wasting disease. And mink are raised for their skins or their pelts. They make ladies' fur coats and things. So the mink rancher, he would tell his neighboring farmers, if you find a dead animal on your ranch, let me know. I'll be happy to take care of it so you don't have to bury it. He would butcher that and feed them to his mink, because then he didn't have to buy meat for them. Presumably, he got an animal that died from chronic wasting disease. Chronic wasting disease is somewhat similar to mad cow disease, but it's found in mule deer and elk. Okay? And sheep, we've already mentioned scrapie. And the cats from probably cat food. So the meat and bone meal, that's what comes out of the processing plant. Everything is all cooked together. Blood, bone, guts, fat that they trim off, and that comes out as a meat and bone meal. And that was shipped all over the world. To many, many different countries it was sent. And Indonesia, they bought, I don't know how many 1,000 pounds. So when you go to a feedlot, you see that trough the animals are eating from, they're not grazing out on the grass, you say grain-fed beef, So they add animal byproduct to that. And that will help the animals gain weight faster so they can get them up for market size, and then they can slaughter them. The faster they can get the animal to grow, the less they have to feed them, the shorter time, so they make more money. They want the animals to grow as fast as they can. And they also add antibiotics to the feed for some of those animals as well, because they know when they do that, the animals tend to grow faster. But that causes a problem with antibiotic resistance. Okay? So the meat and bone meal, 65 countries bought meat and bone meal from the United Kingdom between 1988 and 96. Indonesia bought almost 600,000 tons. I just gave a talk to a group from Indonesia, Zoom talk, on this same thing last Thursday night. So as I was reviewing the slides, I said, I've already gone over this, but no, that was for my talk for Indonesia. Now, the infective agent is something called a prion. A prion is a protein particle. It's different from a virus. It's different from a bacteria. Okay? The disease caused by prions are fatal. If you ingest a prion and you get sick from it, you're going to die. There's no cure. Okay? Now, the problem with prions, they're in the animal byproduct, the blood and bone meal of the animals. But you see, doesn't all the cooking and processing kill the prion? Unfortunately, the answer is no. So if we have mad cow disease, BSE in cattle, CJD in humans, chronic wasting disease in the mule deer and elk, and variant of CJD, that's a human form of mad cow disease in humans. So a prion is an abnormally shaped protein particle. It attacks the nervous system. And here's an artist idea. You have the normal protein on the left and the abnormally shaped protein or the prion on the right. Okay? Now, the problem with prions is normal temperatures for sterilization, 100 degrees centigrade or 212 degrees Fahrenheit, will not render the prion non-infective. Okay? So they're highly stable. They resist high temperatures used for sterilization, resist freezing, formaldehyde, alcohol, gamma radiation, and you can even burn them at up to 680 degrees Fahrenheit, and they are still infective. So that's the problem with prions, okay? So infected prions pull in the muscle of mice after they've been injected in the brain. So some scientists, they injected this material from an animal to the brains of the mice, and then they looked in the muscle. They wanted to see if they found prions. Yes, they found prions in the muscle tissue. Okay? Now, a Swiss researcher was looking for prions in 8 out of the 32 muscle samples from humans who died of Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease. That's not mad cow disease, but that's a prion disease. And he found in these 32 samples, he found prions in 25% of the samples. So they're present in the muscle tissue of people who died from Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease. So that's a neurologic disease. So they found prions in the urine, so that's not so cool. And they found prions in the liver. Some of you who have ever eaten, liver and onions. I remember when I was not a vegetarian, I kind of like liver and onions. I like the onions better than the liver. The liver always had kind of a weird taste to it. I didn't know what that was. But of course, I didn't know anything when I was a little child. That weird taste is because of all the blood that's in the liver. That's what's giving it that weird, strange taste. I like the onions, still like onions, but I don't like blood, and I definitely don't like liver. I don't eat liver, okay? It's been years since I've done that. So humans who eat beef infected with the prions that cause mad cow disease could develop a human form of mad cow disease. It's called V variant of CJD. And there's no cure. You get it, you'll die. Now, when you have, I remember as a kid, I would go down, my mom and she would go buy meat at the butcher shop. She didn't go to the grocery, bought at the butcher shop. I remember going to the butcher shop, and I'd see a truck backed up to the butcher shop, and they would have these sides of beef hanging on a hook. They'd go down a thing on a chain into the butcher shop. Then they get in the butcher shop, and they would cut these up. Well, how do they get a side of beef? They get a big saw, and they split the carcass right down the middle, And so what you have then, fat and bone dust gets all over the saw. Slurry, the spinal cord in it, runs all over the animal. So if there's prions in it, it's going to contaminate the animal. So they hose them off with hot water and vinegar. What's that going to do if there's prions in it? Nothing, okay? So that's what this gentleman from the National Cattlemen's Beef Association, that's how he clean off the animals after they've been split down the middle. So T-bone steak, are you sure you want to eat that? When I was a kid, I liked T-bone steak. I liked prime ribs. I liked all of that stuff. I didn't know any better. That's the way my family raised me. But like I said, when we had our own children, we raised them on a plant-based diet. And when you look at this T-bone steak, you see what this little notch is right there? What goes through there? Spinal cord. Okay? This is the backbone, vertebra of the cow. So T-bone steaks are cut from the area where the vertebra meets the ribs, okay? And it's going to be contaminated with spinal cord. So it's not so cool. Well, how do you diagnose a prion disease? If you suspect someone has it, they have a long incubation period. From the time someone eats something contaminated with the prions, if it had from an animal with mad cow disease, it could be 10 or 15 years before they develop the disease. That's called the incubation period. And when the person dies, you can do an autopsy and look at the brain, and you look and see if there's a spongiform appearance. But they have some tests using the spinal fluid. I had a patient friend who was concerned that one of her relatives had died of mad cow disease, and so she says she needed to find out where she could have some samples of the brain tissue sent to check and see if that person had indeed died from mad cow disease. So they got the samples and they sent them, and the person did not die from VCJD, the human form of mad cow disease. So can the disease be transmitted from the cow to the calf? They said no. That's what they said, but not so sure. And that's how they move dead animals around. That is not a mad cow, but so when they haul the animals off to the slaughterhouse, they put them in big trucks on trains, and sometimes the animals get to the slaughterhouse, they've died in transit, so they just pick them up with a forklift, and that's how they move them around. Now, these are animals with diseases resembling mad cow disease. They find them in cattle and pigs, mink, cats, ostrich, sheep, mule deer, elk, cheetahs, monkeys, pumas and ocelots, mice, goats, gemsbok. And you see that some of these animals, they're called kind of exotic animals. How would these animals get them? Well, most of these animals were in the London Zoo. And the people who took care of these animals, they would use animal byproduct and add it to the food they gave to these animals because it was a cheap form of protein. So that's how some of those animals got sick. Domestic prion-infected cattle have been found in all of these different countries. So all the ones in red, and again, almost all of those countries had imported blood and bone meal from England. Prion-infected humans, the human form of mad cow disease. Britain, France, Italy, United States, Japan, Hong Kong, Canada. How did people in Hong Kong get it? Well, the people in Hong Kong who got it, there were only a few. They had previously lived in England. They lived there for some time, and that was during the time when mad cow disease was first known. So that's where they probably got it. Japan is somewhat the same thing. And the United States, again, people, if you traveled back and forth to England, spend any time eating out in England, and if you're not on a plant-based diet, lots of meat, So, are you hearing me loud enough? Okay. So, 20 cows in Canada were confirmed with mad cow disease February of 2015. So anyone need a hamburger, roast prime ribs, or T-bone steak? I used to like all of that, but not anymore. First recognized, the first case of mad cow disease in the U.S. was found in December of 2000. Test was positive December 22 of 2003. The animal was spotted December 9, and the confirmatory test proved that it was present in the U.S. So that was not good news for the beef industry. They found 6 cases, and 1 in Texas, Florida, California, Washington, 2 in Alabama, the last one August 26, 2018, for a total of 6 thus far. And this was confirmed by testing samples from these animals. Deaths from the human form of mad cow disease, VCJD. Well, this was kind of tragic. This gentleman, Antonio Ruiz Villacusa, he was a researcher in mad cow disease, but apparently he wasn't as careful as he should be handling the samples, and he got infected with it and subsequently died. So first death in the U.S. was reported in January of 2004. 4th case, May of 2014. They thought it was going to be a lot worse. It was much smaller than they thought, so they got by pretty easily. There have been 178 deaths worldwide. I tried to check the data on this, see if there'd been any update on data. But look at the bottom. 4 dairy farmers have died from the human form. This would make you believe that repeated contact with animals with the disease would increase your risk of contracting the disease. Okay? Now, what foods could be infected with prions? Well, the brain and spinal cord are the worst. Organ tissue is found in the muscle tissue. It's been documented in milk. And the other thing is some people, I hope not you, they go to the health food store and they've got a big row of shelves of bottles of supplements, and I see these people looking at it, want this thing, and I'd like to go up and say to them, do you really think you're going to find health in those bottles of supplements? He says, if you want health, there's certain rules you need to follow, like New Start, G-Bombs, and Whole Foods, plant-based. But you're not going to find it by all those supplements. But some of those supplements, if you read the label, they have animal glandular extracts in them. And you don't know unless you read the label. And if you read the label, you find anything that says animal glandular extracts, for sure you don't want to buy that, because you don't know what animal it came from unless they specified, and you don't know what country it came from unless you specified. Now, I know that something commonly used in the manufacturing of pills is something called gelatin, and sometimes that's used. And you can read, most companies just say gelatin. Some companies will say the source of the gelatin. I know that I've looked at Costco and some of their Kirkwood brands. It says porcine gelatin. So if it's porcine gelatin, what kind of animal did it come from? A pig, okay? And there are some pills and supplements that you can buy. They say vegan, there's no gelatin or anything in them. So you need to read the labels, okay? And they found prions in milk. Murder burger. That's a great name for a fast food restaurant. And that's what it used to be before mad cow disease came out. And when mad cow disease came out, they changed their name. They offered a prize of $1,000 cash and 1 free meal a day for the rest of your life, however short it might be. And they changed the name from Murder Burger to Murder spelled backwards, Red Rum Burger, okay? And this was the restaurant. It was in Davis, California. It's where the University of California, Davis is. And they said, so good they're to die for. And over on the right, but you can't see, it says, serving ostrich, the healthy alternative. So when I saw that sign beside the road when I was driving towards Davis, because my daughter went to vet school at Davis, I said, Murder Burger. I took a picture of the sign by the road, and I went down to the restaurant. I took this picture. I said, I've got to have that for my health talks, murder burger. So they've also got a fast food restaurant called the Heart Attack Grill. Okay, and you can see what they sell: a quadruple bypass burger. Are you man enough to eat that? The quadruple bypass burger is rather pricey. It's about $25, but the challenge was, could one person eat that all by itself? And you see it's got 4 8-ounce patties of ground beef. It's got slices of bacon in there, slices of cheese. The only healthy thing in there would be the tomatoes and the lettuce, and maybe the onions in the quadruple bypass burger. And that's got close to 10,000 calories in it, plus untold amounts of cholesterol. Now, previously, when you make hamburgers, they would have to, well, no, they still do, but previously when they made hamburgers, they had something called a binder, because if you don't put a binder when you make your meat patties, the patties are going to fall apart. So before, the binders used to be made from the eyes, the brains, and the spinal cord of the cows. But after mad cow disease came out, they changed that. They didn't use that as binder for their hamburger patties. Because that way they could say it's all beef. And if they used a vegetable binder, they couldn't say 100% beef. So that was this is the restaurant near where I now live. Murder Burger became Red Rum Burger, and now it's completely closed, and it's a Starbucks is now there where Red Rum Burger used to be. And that's only about 3 miles from where my home is in Roseville. So brain, spinal cord, intestines can still end up on the table behind labels like beef flavoring. If you buy processed, like noodle soups and things like this, packaged foods, look on the label. If it says beef flavoring, if it says imitation or artificial, that may be okay. But if it says beef flavoring, it's not vegetarian. So you've got to be careful. And if you like these instant noodle soups, Ichiban and all that kind of, look on the packet of the flavoring, read the label, see what's in there. Because they do have imitation beef flavoring, imitation chicken flavoring, and I've also gone online and put those words in and asked, like on Google, I says, is imitation beef flavoring and imitation chicken flavoring, is it vegetarian, is it vegan? And I really couldn't get a good response. Some people say yes, some people say no. So the safest way is not to eat. Now, how would you like to have a hamburger stand with that name? Fat Burger. But that was a restaurant down in Southern California. When I saw that, I've got to get a picture of this. The last great hamburger stand, Fat Burger. So if people have the human form of mad cow disease, VCJD, and they donate blood, because some of them, they may have donated blood before they knew they had the disease, is there any risk from getting blood products from a person who has had that disease? That's a good question. And they really haven't found too many cases any cases that I know of that have been transmitted that way, but I would be concerned. How about butcher's knives? If the butcher cut up the cow, could he contaminate his knives and his saws with prions from cutting up a contaminated animal? Well, here was a case in England, 2001. They found, I think it was 3 cases related to this one butcher shop. All the people had gotten their meat from this one butcher shop. And they asked him where he got his meat from. He says, well, he didn't buy it from the slaughterhouse. He got it straight from the ranchers, and he slaughtered the cattle himself. So presumably, the saws and the knives that he used to butcher the animals had prions in it and contaminated the meat. So that was an interesting study. So they all bought meat from the same butcher shop. This was a consultant microbiologist at that time. He said the findings were alarming. This would force scientists to increase the estimates for the number of people who will eventually die from the human form of mad cow disease. But so far, the number that I can get out, it's been less than 250 people. So it's a lot less than they thought. Okay. Is there any relationship between Alzheimer's disease, Alzheimer's dementia, and prion disease? Good question. They're both diseases of the brain. Symptoms are similar. They're fatal. No blood tests. They can usually be detected in an autopsy. And there's a spongy appearance of both brains. So you see here in this picture, the sponge-like appearance, the holes in the sample on the left, that's from a person who's died of the human form of mad cow disease, VCJD. Well, the sample on the right is from a person who didn't have that. There's no holes in it. That's why they call it spongiform. Symptoms: loss of memory, confusion, strange behavior, and difficulty walking. Incubation period, 10 to 15 years. So people who have recently diagnosed may have eaten the contaminated beef 10 or 15 years ago. Haven't seen much of this lately. The other problem we mentioned already a little bit was antibiotics. Antibiotics are often used in the raising of food animals, chickens, beef, and others, because the animals will grow faster. They get the market size faster. But the problem is with that, then there's problems with antibiotic resistance. If you eat an animal that's been treated with antibiotics, if they haven't stopped it long enough before the animal is slaughtered, it's possible you could get some traces of that antibiotic in your system, and you could develop, then you could become sensitized to that, and later on, if you were given that antibiotic because you had an illness which required an antibiotic, you could have a reaction or an allergic reaction to that antibiotic, even though you'd never had it. But you could have had it by eating animals raised with antibiotics in their feed. Food poisoning, common problem in the U.S. Every day, almost 150,000 Americans get some form of food poisoning. This is daily, 150,000. And 350 will end up in the hospital, and 8 people will die. I just took the numbers for a year and divided by 365. But that's what we see in the U.S. Food poisoning, pretty common. Okay? Salmonella is the most common agent that is in food that will make you sick. It's a bacteria. 28% of the cases, 35% of the hospitalizations, 90% of the problems were due to salmonella. There's another bug here called the norovirus. This is sometimes encountered on cruise ships, okay? It causes vomiting and diarrhea and that people get sick. Campylobacter, toxoplasma, E. coli O157, Listeria, and Clostridium perfringens. Those are all things that will make people sick. Cruise ships are fairly careful nowadays. This is probably 5 to 10 years. When you go on a cruise ship, once you board the cruise ship, you first get on, they want you to hold your hands out. They're going to put some sort of disinfectant in your hand. You're supposed to clean them and wipe them off. And before you go to the dining room, they do the same thing. And oftentimes, if they've had an outbreak of norovirus, in the buffets which they have on cruise ships, They won't even let you serve yourself food, because if you've got the norovirus in your hand, you use the utensil to put your food in, then someone else picks it up, that could contaminate it. They will serve you the food. Food safety: wash your hands, wash your utensils, undercooked food, and never use the same knife to cut raw meat and then vegetables. And don't use the same cutting board. If you cut meat, on your cutting board, chicken, beef, anything, cut raw meat on your cutting board, that's contaminated, especially chicken. Chicken is really bad, okay? Human milk, meat eaters, 99% of them had some levels of DDT in their human milk. Vegetarians, only 8%. So again, that comes from eating meat. Fish contamination. Fish from mildly polluted water concentrate toxins. So you say fish should be safe. It's out in the ocean. But there's mercury and other things. You really don't want to eat fish. It's not really safe. And the fatty tissues include pesticides. So chlorinated hydrocarbons, mercury, dioxin, you don't want any of that in your food. PCBs, polychlorinated biphenyls, petroleum hydrocarbons, lead, and other things. So the safest way is don't eat fish. How about farm-raised fish? That's not so good either, because the stuff they feed the farm-raised fish is not so good. In Asia, where we lived in Singapore and also in Hong Kong, they would have these big floating restaurants, and they would serve seafood. And you would go out to the restaurant, and then you would, the guy would catch a fish in the big pond, and he'd say, do you want this one? And also in Singapore, when I was working in Singapore, I worked at Youngberg Hospital, and occasionally, sometimes, I had no way or reason of knowing what was happening, but there was this horrible, horrible smell. It's a stench. It was really foul. And so I would ask the local people who worked in the hospital, what's that terrible smell from? They say, oh, Doc, don't you know? I said, if I knew, I wouldn't ask you. He says, that's from the pig farms. He says, what do you mean the pig farms? Well, there's pig farms about 3 or 4 miles away, and when the wind would blow across the pig farms the right way and come to our hospital, it had this terrible foul smell. Why? Because in the pig farms, all the waste and stuff from the pig farms, they would just push that over into a big pond, pool, and what did they have in the big pond or pool? Fish. The fish would eat the pig waste, and then the people would go and buy the fish. So that wasn't so cool. And I was glad I was a vegetarian. So you got to be careful, know what you're eating. 28% of our nation's lakes are contaminated with mercury, dioxins, and other chemicals. That's according to the Environmental Protection Agency. And mercury levels. Oh, this was a doctor. He wanted to do a study on his patients. So he asked his patients if they would be willing to give a blood sample. So he interviewed 720 patients. 116 agreed. To qualify for the study, you had to eat fish at least twice a week. Okay? So then he checked them. He wanted to see how much mercury they had in their systems. So what he found was that 89% of that 116 patients had mercury levels higher than what was recognized as safe by the National Academy of Science, 5 parts per million. They were only eating fish twice a week, and they had 89% of them had more than 5 parts per million mercury. So what fish were they eating? Canned tuna, salmon, different things like that. I remember when I was a little kid, I used to like canned salmon and canned tuna, but it's not too good an idea for you to eat that, okay? They had swordfish, other fish, so they ate was halibut, ahi, sea bass. Sushi. Sushi is not a fish, but sushi often contains fish. There was a executive of a high-tech company in New York, and he was having some strange neuro-like symptoms. And the people, his doctors, weren't really able to figure out what they were caused by. So one of them asked him, said, "What kind of food do you eat?" He said, "Well, I eat very healthily. I don't eat red meat. I just eat fish and lots of sushi." So they checked his mercury levels. They were very, very high. So they told him, "You've got to stop eating fish." And so as he did that, his levels came down and his symptoms disappeared. So fish is not the best food. Canned tuna. I used to like tuna fish burgers. Tuna fish with some eggs. No more. Okay. Here they sent buyers out to different markets in New York, and they bought samples of tuna. And they found mercury in between 0.018 to 0.774. That's less than 1 part per million, but it was legal to sell it, so it was okay. But so you want to be careful. Only 44% of U.S. seafood firms are following the Food and Drug Administration's about sanitation and so on. And that's why there's so much of a problem with food poisoning with seafood. What's the most dangerous seafood that is consumed? Raw shellfish. What's the most commonly consumed raw shellfish here in the United States? Since you people you don't eat shellfish, raw oysters. They have oyster bars, and they serve raw oysters. When you eat a raw oyster, you know what you're getting? The whole living organism, including its GI tract, with all the waste in there. That's like plucking a live chicken and eating it whole, guts and all. In other words, you're getting oyster waste, oyster fecal matter, if you want to say it that way, when you eat a raw oyster. You can season it with whatever, but you don't want to eat raw oysters. And I remember when I was out scuba diving with some of my buddies in Puerto Rico, and I'm collecting seashells, and I picked up an oyster, a thorny oyster, which had real long, beautiful spines. And I picked it up very carefully, and I was taking it back because I wanted the shell. I didn't care about the animal inside, but one of my diving buddies said, "Hey, Doc, can I eat the oyster?" I said, "Sure." So the oyster was partly open. He put his knife in. He cut the muscle that would close it, so it opened up like this, and he put it up. He said, "Oh, Doc, that was good. Thank you very much." I said, "Fine, you go ahead and enjoy your raw oyster." Would you name a restaurant the Dead Fish? That was the actual name of a restaurant down in the San Francisco area. Dead Fish, Crab House, and Prime Rib. Does that look appetizing? That's dead fish. Have a bite. It doesn't look too appetizing to me. How about that? Chicken drumsticks. Raw chicken. Raw chicken is bad news. Most raw chicken that's processed in the traditional way is usually contaminated with E. coli. How about, cuttlefish, squid, things like that, shrimp. National Cancer Institute data show increased death rate from cancer living where people have, fish have large amounts of tumor. It's because they eat it. Is fish farming okay, farm-raised fish? Well, if you eat farm-raised salmon, if they then add food coloring to the feed that's given to the salmon, you know what color the salmon would be? It wouldn't be pink. It'd be kind of a grayish white. So they have to add food coloring to the feed they give to that. And they often use antibiotics. This is the number of animals that are slaughtered every day in the U.S. 15 million chickens, 250,000 hogs, and 100,000 cattle. Okay? 5.6 billion animals a year. Animals' Revenge. This is by Dr. William Roberts, the editor of the American Journal of Cardiology. He said this: we raise them, the animals, kill them, eat them, and then they get their revenge because of the diseases they cause in people. That's true. Which is better for your environment, meat or plants? 16 pounds of grain to produce a pound of beef. 2,500 gallons of water for 1 pound of meat. You know, meat takes 100 times more water to produce a pound of meat than a pound of wheat. So much kinder to your environment to use animal foods. Gallons of water to produce 1 day's food for one person. Meat eater, 4,000 gallons. Lacto-ovo vegetarian, 1,200. Vegan, only 300 gallons. Okay? E. coli. If you find E. coli in your food, that means there's fecal contamination. And this causes 73,000 illnesses each year, mostly in children. And there's one really bad form of E. coli. It's called E. coli O157H7. And that causes a hemolytic uremia. And it's really bad news. Half of chicken samples were contaminated with fecal matter. So if you take raw chicken into your house and you want to wash it off in your sink, they've done studies where they would go and they would check the sink afterwards to see if there's E. coli. And virtually every sink there was E. coli found, okay? So you don't want to take raw chicken in your house. And they told the people to be real careful, be more sanitary, had them check it again. There was less contamination, but there was still E. coli contamination. And how about sprouts? You like sprouts? Alfalfa sprouts. Probably better off not to eat commercially produced alfalfa sprouts. The reason is because oftentimes where the alfalfa is raised, they fertilize the fields with animal manure. And sometimes there's E. coli on the alfalfa sprouts. So this is the one I told you about, E. coli O157H7. 600 infections and 4 deaths are reported. In 92, Jack in the Box had an outbreak up in Washington, and that was a bad problem. Severe bloody diarrhea, hemolytic uremic syndrome, okay? And E. coli is found in beef, sausage, salami, raw milk, unpasteurized apple cider, salad greens, and venison when they're contaminated. And one of the largest recalls was 143, that's not thousand, million pounds of ground beef in February of 2008 because of an outbreak of E. coli. So a tiny uncooked particle of hamburger meat can contain enough of the pathogen to kill you. That's from, what is it? Fast Food Nation. That's an interesting book. Okay, let's go on. About finished. So it's virtually impossible to process meat, fish, and chicken without bacterial contamination. Now, another thing in animals, milk, is some cattle are infected with a virus called the bovine leukemia virus. And if the animal has this and they produce milk, okay, if you drink milk from that animal, is there any risk? Well, there's some interesting studies found. The most common leukemia found in children, the most common cause of death after accidents in little kids is leukemia. And most of these children have been drinking milk from cows. Well, but you say it's pasteurized. Well, yeah, it's true, but sometimes there's contamination. And even if it's pasteurized, do you want to drink milk from an animal that's had bovine leukemia virus? You don't know, because when they take the milk, they just dump it all in together. It's all pooled, okay? Okay. Any questions? Does anyone have any questions about food animals and disease? Yes. Here, where's the? Let me give you a microphone. What was your question? So everyone else can.
But wouldn't cheese have all the same viruses and bacteria
Oh, cheese.
from the milks and processing?
Yeah. I don't know of any studies done on cheese, but the primary problem with cheese is the saturated fat and the cholesterol. Cheese is worse for you than red meat. Okay. Any other questions? Okay, yes.
Okay, you might have to help me with the initials. CVJ, Creutzfeldt, Jakob,
Creutzfeldt-Jakob, CJD.
CJD. How common is that today in this era?
Oh, in the U.S., there's approximately 1 death per million people from CJD in the U.S. So since our population is around 300 million, it's about 300 deaths. That's the normal occurrence. So it's not a common disease, but it is present. Okay. Any other questions? Take a break, get up, stretch, get a drink of water, go to the bathroom, and I'll see you for the next talk on use it or lose it.